Hello, invisible audience! I'm gonna set up my January bullet journal spreads today, and I'd like to invite you to join me. I'm still working on perfecting my setup, so please forgive me as I trial and error my way through these first few videos. I know that the angle is kinda odd. I'm troubleshooting. It'll get there. And speaking of trial and error, I'm gonna be painting this cover page with gouache. And this is only my second time painting with gouache, so I'm still learning, and there's a few places where the colors come out much darker than I'd intended. I think in the future I'll have a test page for colors to make sure they look like how I want them to look while I'm working. If you haven't worked out what I'm painting yet, I'll tell you that my theme for this month is breakfast. January is like the morning of the year, and a good breakfast is an important start to the day, and for the year too. Right? So I'm painting a variety of plates of breakfast food, and later I'll add a little painted Polaroid-style portrait of Ron Swanson from Parks and Recreation, because it felt right to include the champion of breakfast connoisseurs himself. I mentioned in my previous video that I don't often include quotes in my journals, but I did toy with the idea of including a line from Ron Swanson from an episode of Parks and Rec, which is that there has never been a sadness that can't be cured by breakfast food. It feels like a oddly fitting way to start a new year. Like, everything will be better, and if it's not, at least we have pancakes, you know? But instead of that, I just wrote the word breakfast in the white space in the little Polaroid type thing. That's good enough. The portrait painting process isn't included here in this video because this video is getting pretty long as it is, so I'm gonna upload that separately later this week because, frankly, I'm very pleased with how it turned out, and I think it'll make an interesting little video in its own right. I'm pretty proud of how the majority of this painting process turned out, to be honest, especially considering how new I am to this medium. But the pages of the notebook held up really well, and the paint is pretty forgiving. Later I'll come in and struggle with a couple different pens and add black outlines to everything, but my fine liners are running low on ink and they struggle to adhere to the paint because they just weren't wet enough, and so I end up using a Faber-Castell brush pen, and aside from the lines on the lettering for January being a bit thicker than I'd like, it worked wonderfully, but that's more user error than anything. I'm telling you all of this up front so that I can just let you sit back and watch the process from this point, and I'll be back in with some voiceover once I start working on the calendar. So enjoy me painting breakfast things? Okay, so now that all of that is painted, I'm gonna set up my calendar for the month. The rest of the setups are a lot less artsy after that first one. I'm very forgetful, so I use my journal to write like everything down all the time, so my calendars and weekly spreads have to be more functional than not. I try to keep to that red, blue, yellow kind of color scheme in this setup, and I use a bunch of stickers and some cute sticky notes that are for the most part from Sticky Club, which again I'll link in the description, because gosh, I love Sticky Club. And later in the year I'm planning on trying out some new calendar arrangements, maybe even a Dutch door, but for the first month of the year, I just stuck with a calendar that I know that I'll use, that has worked for me in the past, that works for my needs, and is just very functional. There's the whole rest of the year to try new things, and so I might as well just start out with the basics. For this next spread, I like to condense all of my monthly sort of spread setup type stuff into one page, because that way it's easier for me to flip back to, and I don't forget about things because they're too spread out. So I've tried to design this page as a sort of diner breakfast menu with different food categories as my various boxes. The stuff that I like to keep on this kind of page include a small list of monthly goals, an area to come back to write reflections at the end of the month, a list of nice things, which is basically just an undated gratitude log where I just write down nice things that I appreciate throughout the month. And as long as the little section is full, I don't really mind so much if I have one for every day or not. And then I have a place to list all of the movies and TV shows that I watch that month, and then a place to list all of the other media I consume, such as video games, board games, etc. And then I have a spot usually to write out a playlist, and that's usually just songs that have been in my head throughout the month. And sometimes I'll go through and create a playlist and curate specific sounds for a mood or something, but a lot of times it's just like, oh, I've had this song stuck in my head, better jot it down. And finally, I put a habit tracker. In the future, I might alter the contents of this page and maybe spread it out over 2 pages, depending on if I decide if I want to track more things. I've been trying to do like stretches before bed and like yoga and stuff in the morning, and that's something I might start tracking in the future, but for now I just have the one tracker on whether or not I draw every day, which you don't have to draw every day, but I try to draw as often as I can. Journal stuff like this counts as that though, so. But like I said earlier, this is my basic version of this spread, and it feels right to start the year off with just a simple, sort of clean, standard kind of layout. And this last page that I'm setting up is my first weekly spread. It contains the first 2 days of the month, and then the first full week, going Sunday to Saturday. Normally, I just list my weekdays out on one side of the page, which like you sort of see on one half of the spread is like that, which is a habit that I picked up from working in a traveler's notebook for a while, and I really liked that consistent setup with a full blank page next to it to use for just whatever you need that week. And most weeks, I just sort of gradually collage or scrapbook things into the blank page as a sort of memory book. I'll stick in anything from pressed flowers to bits of envelopes, notes or journal entries, tickets, tags, or labels from things throughout the week, or otherwise doodles and drawings of outfits I wore or things that I did, D&D characters, just sort of whatever is happening that week. I try to sort of encapsulate it into a sort of collage-y type thing. And the blank page really becomes a kind of junk journal, which I don't know if I've ever seen anyone do quite the way that I do, and that's a big part of the reason why I wanted to share this process on YouTube and on Instagram. And if you're interested in seeing more of those collage pages, I'll be posting some on my Instagram account. At Pages by Pachu is where I'm going to be putting those, and I'll post them from past journal spreads, and I'll post them from, journal spreads going forward, so you'll get a nice sort of mix of like a lot of different styles. They're very inconsistent in how they turn out. They often have interactive elements like envelopes or papers that flip up and fold, which you'll see this one is an example of that. I have like a little sort of to-do list that flips up and I can just put notes behind it. And because this one's not really a full page, I just kind of filled it in all now instead of doing it gradually throughout the week, because I sort of wanted to give an example of what these pages typically look like for me. And this is a pretty good basic sort of example of how they turn out. And now it's time for the final flip through. So we've got the painted breakfast cover page, and as you can see, I just sort of taped that Polaroid portrait sort of to the page, but didn't attach it down all of the way. So it really does just sort of look like there's just a Polaroid sitting there on this strangely white table, I guess, amongst the breakfast food. Then we've got the January calendar. Monthly journal / record keeping spread kind of stuff. And my first weekly spread of the year. And that's it. Thank you so much for watching. Pachoo, pachoo, pachoo.